to the Loosen Up Your Painting podcast, the podcast for creatives looking to get inspiration, tips and advice on anything to do with art and creativity. If you enjoy creating something, then this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Malcolm Dewey, a full-time artist at malcolmdeweyfineart.com, and let's begin the show. Welcome to another episode of the Loosen Up Your Painting podcast. I'm glad to be talking to you again. And what I'm going to be focusing on in this podcast is some artists Q&A. I receive many questions all the time from artists all over the world. And very often I'm answering them via email, but this time I'm putting them in this podcast episode because I think they apply to so many of you out there, especially beginner artists. And I focus a lot on helping beginners get a good start in their painting. And I received a series of questions from Marko Vukovic. I hope I pronounced your surname correct there, Marko. But as I said to you, there were some really good questions, and I wanted to reply to them via a podcast or a video so that it would help other artists as well. And I think Marko says he lives in Skopje, Macedonia. So that's not an area that I get a lot of artists sending me questions from. So I thought, why not? Let's get some of these answers out there that will be helpful to all of you as well. Okay, so before I begin, if you're still struggling with a lot of painting issues and trying to figure out how to do your paintings, I do a monthly get-together called the Artist Live channel where I do a demonstration. We cover new topics, new subjects, and I have assignments and references and all those good things that can help you with your painting. So if you're interested in something like that, also a community of artists to help each other, have a look at the Artist Live channel. You'll find that on my painting school, and I will put links in the descriptions so you can find that a lot easier. All right, let's dive in. Question 1. Acrylics or oils? Marko says he's been painting for just over a month and he has bought some cheap acrylics. Should he get better quality acrylics? Or is acrylics even the right thing? Should he go straight into oils? Okay, let's answer this question because it actually is something that's asked quite often, and I guess I have to say right at the beginning, both mediums have their merits, and oils or acrylics, neither of them is inherently a bad medium to use. Obviously, professionals are using both mediums. But as a beginner, here are a few things that are good with acrylics. Okay, acrylics are quite forgiving and easy to clean up, and they have a fast drying time. It makes it easier to make corrections. Generally less expensive unless you're going with the artist quality version, and it's a good way to learn basic color mixing. Now, what I did in my early stages as a impressionist painter was I used acrylics. I started out with acrylics, and what I was doing was just trying to discover how to paint in a fine art style. Yes, acrylics were cheaper, they were easier to use and easier to clean up. My first studio was a corner in my bedroom. So my wife and I were sharing space with my studio, and of course I was worried about using oils and having bad smelling solvents, things like that. So acrylics was great for that. And then I wanted to look into oils as well, and I started using a technique of painting with oils over dry acrylics. I started using the acrylics to set up the foundations of the painting, and then would go over that with one layer of oils. that made a lot of sense to me because I wasn't painting a lot of wet over wet with oils. And acrylics was really a helpful solution to that problem. I could leave some of the painting where the acrylics were still exposed and other areas where I could use the oils to gain a lot more vibrancy. You see, the thing is, oils simply do have certain qualities that are very, very difficult to mimic with acrylics. The intensity of the oil pigments and that textured vibrancy is very difficult to achieve with acrylics. Now, starting out with acrylics, I think, is an excellent thing to do. For the reasons I've stated about being able to set up your painting, compose it, paint layer over layer fairly quickly with less problems of the issues with painting wet over wet with oils. Also, oils can be intimidating. No matter what we say, oils are an intimidating medium for beginners. Now, you can help yourself with the acrylics and make it easier to work with. Student-grade acrylic paint is certainly a lot cheaper, but it's not going to have the pigment vibrancy. And vibrancy is a real issue with acrylics. Even student oils are much more intense than student acrylics. So, unfortunately, to really get, let's put it this way, a lot of buzz and fun out of your acrylics, I think you're going to have to try to upgrade your paints at least to a good quality student grade, because there are some basic student acrylics that are really, really terrible. Right? They're just pasty, a complete waste of time, and I would probably say more aligned with children. They just want to play with paint. So if you are a serious hobby painter, have a good quality acrylic paint. And then move up to professional grade, because that's a whole nother level as well. So if you're looking at good quality student paints, I would say, well, you could try Amsterdam by Royal Talens. I have been using that in a lot of my YouTube videos. I use Amsterdam. I just find that they are very easy to use because I don't have to add water to them, and they have a good intensity. They are good student acrylics. As far as professional brands go, you've seen me use golden acrylics, whether it's the regular golden acrylics or golden open acrylics for a longer drying paint. You can also try Liquitex. They're also excellent. The downside, of course, with professional brands is that they are very expensive. And if you're really terrified of using those expensive acrylics, it's not going to help you develop your painting skills. You can't sit there and sweat over every brushstroke because you see it as money going down the drain. That will ruin your painting. So paint with confidence, paint with joy, with pleasure, and just go for it and use the paints that you are comfortable. Get the best paints you are comfortable paying for, and then really put in the time and study your paint and study your subject, and get involved with artist communities, artist lessons online. Study up and put in the time, and you'll see a big improvement happening very quickly. One last word on this oils over acrylics thing is, after a while I went into oils practically full time, because I have to admit I found the vibrancy of the lights, right? The light colors, those cadmiums, even the titanium white suddenly was like so powerful. So I found using the lights for oils to be incredibly rewarding, and I simply wasn't getting that same feeling with the acrylics. But I found the acrylics were really excellent for the darks, right? Getting transparent darks and colorful darks in my paintings. So that's where I was combining the two mediums and getting vibrant, bright lights with oils, and pretty much getting by with the acrylics for some of the darks and colorful dark shadow areas. And then back into oils pretty much full time as well. And the question is, which one's better than the other? Well, I can't really say one's better than the other. In the world of selling paintings, yeah, I think oil paintings still are sort of first in mind for a lot of collectors and buyers. An original oil painting just seems to have a bit of an extra cachet than perhaps an original acrylic painting. But that would be for collectors that aren't really, involved in creating art. And I think some of those older ideas still persist to a degree. So you choose, but I think incorporate both in your learning process and try to put in more time with your painting just to get to know whatever medium you are using. Okay, next question, safety and space considerations. Acrylics have their advantages for home painting. There are no harmful fumes and water-based cleanup is convenient, and you don't need any special ventilation, right? And it's safe for shared living spaces. Like I said, I was using the corner of our bedroom to have as a studio until I could move my studio elsewhere. And I had that arrangement for anything up to 6 months or longer, and it was quite doable. And when you're starting out with painting, the tendency is to get paint on everything. Now, there is obviously one issue with acrylics, okay? If you get acrylics in your clothing or some item in the room that you work in, maybe on the curtain or on the carpet, and you don't clean it before it's dry, you really do have a big problem, because that acrylic dries and bonds with fabric, and it can ruin your clothing. I have ruined many items of clothing, and that's not fun. So cover yourself with a very good apron and keep an eye out for spills. The thing with oil paint, it takes a long time to dry and very easy to clean up. With a bit of dishwashing liquid, you can clean just about anything while that paint's still wet. Okay, Marco mentioned that he is painting in his living room. No problem there with acrylics. You can use them with a lot of confidence. Now, Marco also mentioned that he didn't want to make the mistake of putting a lot of time and money into the wrong medium. Now, I've already touched on the comparison with acrylics and oils, and I don't think either of them is a wrong medium. So carry on with the acrylics as you are. A little tip I can give you with acrylics is, once the acrylics have dried and you like the painting, give it a coat of varnish. I just use retouch varnish, and those acrylics look like oil paints. It's really hard to distinguish because acrylics do dry a little duller than the oils. So varnish the acrylic painting when it's dry and it will look great. So the thing to keep in mind though with oil paint and safety, the modern oil paints today are quite harmless, and you can use solvents that are water-based as well. And honestly, I don't use much in the line of mediums. I use a little bit of Zest-It. It's a product that's a non-toxic medium, and I use that to just soften the paints in the initial blocking in stage if I need to. There's no odor. In fact, whatever odor there is, it's more like the smell of oranges, so it's not off-putting. And for the rest of the painting, it's done with the paint straight out the tube. I use paints that are quite soft, straight out the tube, like Rembrandt or Maya Mary Classico, if you want a good student painting. So you don't actually need solvents. Of course, there are also water mixable oils, and I use a bit of linseed oil in that when I need to, and that makes the water mixable oils nice and soft. When it comes to washing your brushes, you can use gentle soaps. You can even use good dishwashing liquid as well for bristle brushes. I find it's not too bad. And that's it. Rinse them off with water, dry them, and store them upright in a jar or something like that, the old-fashioned way, and your brushes will still last a long time, and you haven't used any toxic materials. So oils can still work indoors. You don't have to worry about using things like turpentine or toxic solvents. Okay, next question is brushes. All right, Marco is using acrylic brushes and says they're very soft and he won't be able to get the brush strokes shown in my paintings, for example, where there's a lot of texture. And if he decides to work with oils, will he need different brushes? Okay, absolutely, brushes do influence how the painting looks, and there are brushes that are appropriate for the technique you are using. Now, with acrylics, I mostly use a synthetic softer brush. I'm using a Daler Rowney brushes. They're called Crylla, Cryla, and I find they work very well. Mostly long flats and a couple of long round brushes, and that takes care of everything, and they're easy to wash with water, and they last a long time. In fact, they can pretty much last for many, many years if you make sure you wash them well and rinse them with water straight after you've finished your acrylic painting. But with oil paints, if you're going to work in a impressionist loose sort of style with a bit of thicker paint and some texture, well, you're going to want to use bristle brushes. There's no doubt about it. Bristle brushes and good quality bristle brushes make a big, big difference. I can recommend Raphael Paris Classic brushes. They're my favorite, but there are many other good quality brands as well. Rosemary & Co., even Daler Rowney's Graduate bristle brushes are actually very good. They keep their shape and they're not that expensive. You want good bristles that don't bend out of shape, that sort of bind together and keep their shape. And basically they'll last a very long time as well. I usually wear mine down, so I start out with a long flat. After 6 months it looks more like a filbert, and it's got a bit shorter as well, and they just keep working. So bristle brushes can also be used with acrylics if you want to get stronger texture, but I find bristle brushes don't really enjoy exposure to water. They retain their shape much better when I'm using oils. I just find that with acrylics, the bristle brushes have a shorter lifespan, but with oils, they work forever. Okay, just look after them and clean them thoroughly and rinse them out, let them dry. So yes, your soft synthetic brushes are fine with acrylics. If you want a bit more texture, you could consider some bristle brushes. With oils, you'll want bristle brushes as your main brush. Okay, next question. He says that very often he feels like he's fighting with his colors, that the acrylics blur and lose intensity, and he has to layer lots of paint just to get the colors to come back. And this constant fixing up what he's been doing is not creating a very enjoyable painting process. Also, applying light colors over dark is really troublesome. Most paints are very transparent and I need a lot of layers to add the highlights over the dark shapes. Okay, I think that pretty much comes down to techniques, real technical issues, and not quite so much about the paint as such, but rather knowing how to deal with those paints. So for better color intensity with your acrylics, use less water. In fact, when I'm using acrylics, I don't use any water in the paint. I just use the water to wash the brush. You don't need to dilute those acrylics. Even professional grade like golden acrylics, they don't benefit from bringing water into the paint. So squeeze the paint out onto your palette, go straight into it with the brush, mix the colors you want, but you don't need to add water. Why dilute that pigment? So after you've washed your brush and it's full of water, make sure you use a tissue paper to soak up all of excess water out of the bristles of the brush before you get it back into the paint. Right, then also apply the paint a bit thicker, more like a buttery-like consistency. the acrylics are going to settle down anyway and look fairly thin. So don't apply them thin. You're not glazing with the acrylics. You've got to put that paint down in a fair amount of volume. And for instance, if you're painting over canvas and you can see every little ripple of the canvas cloth after the paint has gone on, then you're putting much too little paint. Always say, get rid of the texture of the canvas and you're starting to get the right volume of paint. Make sure your canvas or panel has been properly toned, right? It's a good idea, especially with acrylics, to tone your panel a color. For landscapes, I usually use something like a cool red or maybe burnt sienna, and in that way I've already got a layer of color. Acrylics have to be color dominant. That doesn't mean don't mix the colors with white or desaturate your color with another color. It simply means getting as intense color and clean color notes and layering them on. So layering techniques, how do you get that light over dark? So you're using titanium white, I presume, which is a very strong white paint. If you're using something like zinc white, get rid of that. Just use titanium white to get the strongest tint, all right, the strongest highlights from your color. You only need a relatively small amount of white paint and then a light color. Now for highlights, you want to use something like a cadmium yellow lemon, for instance, and add a little bit of titanium white to that and see how that looks. The colors like a permanent lemon yellow, all right, where you see the word permanent, it's going to be a lot more transparent than a cadmium. So check the transparency ratings on the side of the tube. Some are rated very transparent, and that's going to mean you're going to have to mix white into it to try to get it more opaque. Maybe you're going to have to mix a cadmium and white into the permanent acrylic paint to get it to the right opacity. So your opaque color must also be applied thicker. So when you're painting your highlights, it's going to be fairly thick, almost like an impasto. So you've got your titanium white, you're using something like a cadmium yellow or a cadmium orange maybe, or cadmium red, and you're going for that highlight. You've put more titanium white into it, and you're going to apply it quite thick where you want those highlights. And by layering the paint almost like you are putting butter on a slice of toast, you know, you've got a lot of butter on your knife and you start one side of the toast and you layer that butter over, or icing a cake, maybe that's a better comparison. You want to use that sort of same line of thinking with the lights in your landscape paintings. The lights, maybe light across the road, is going to be buttered on like nice and thick, like you're putting that icing over the cake. And that means you're painting sort of parallel. Your brush is parallel to the canvas. You're not digging into the canvas. You are spreading the paint over the canvas. Okay, and finally, Marco says he has a hard time finding good compositions. He says he spends most of his time looking for photos on the internet and doesn't seem to like most of the things he can find. And he really does need good reference photos. But he also notices that frequently I make nice looking paintings from dull photographs. So maybe it's something about technique. Okay, so all of those are valid issues and something I get a lot of. A lot of beginners don't know what reference to use. They struggle to find a subject that appeals to them. I think a lot of the problems is simply due to lack of confidence and looking at a reference and thinking that's much too difficult, or the reference looks too boring. It's got to be something spectacular. And that is a big mistake. We see a lot of photos on the internet made by photographers who know how to use things like Photoshop to create spectacular effects. That frequently doesn't translate into a good painting though. Maybe an amazing photograph, but recreate that with a painting, it just looks forced, perhaps fake, and certainly very distracting from what you really want to convey in a scene. Okay, so good photos do help, but it's more important if you can look at an average photo and look at it from the point of view of what are the values, what are the value relationships, the lights, darks, the in-between values. What composition am I looking at? Can I adapt this photo? Can I crop in a bit and look for a strong arrangement of shapes where there's perhaps a dominant dark mass area with nice shadows and then some strong lights to break that up? Look at your understanding of color. Do you understand what colors go into shadows? You know, the Impressionists discovered that blue and violet was the preferred colors where they could create beautiful luminous shadow areas, right? Instead of using black. Also, how you can emphasize certain focal areas. What will you do to make that focal point stand out more? That is more important than making sure you've got something fantastic like the Eiffel Tower or the Taj Mahal in the scene. You know, that's not necessary to create a beautiful painting. So finding references, well, there are sites where you can get beautiful reference photos online, Unsplash, Pexels, and a few others. You don't even have to pay for premium photographs. On the downside, though, you may find your painting has been done by somebody else using the same reference. So the first goal is try to collect your own references using your own camera. Go to the park, go to the beach. When you're on holiday, take dozens of photos. When you're walking around your neighborhood, try to find something that pulls together into a pleasing painting, and you'll probably find that the time of day is more important. Earlier in the morning, later in the afternoon, where the light is warmer and at an angle, you will get better shadow patterns. That's all you really need. And then use your knowledge of color and values and composition to try to create something out of perhaps an average scene. For me, when I go on holiday, and that's not often because I pretty much spend most of my year actually working on my paintings or writing or something like that. But when we do go away, I will spend whatever it is. If it's a week, almost every day, my camera doesn't leave my side and I'm taking hundreds of photographs. And that set of photos will last me a long, long time. Frequently, there will be only a handful of photos that have a truly amazing composition and light effects, and I will repaint those, and each one is going to look different because I'm applying my knowledge of color, for instance, to try cobalt blue, for instance, in the shadows instead of ultramarine blue, and now the painting is going to be looking much different. So when you're looking at your photos, look for good value structure, look for interesting light patterns and shadow patterns, strong compositional elements. You know, just a road heading off into the distance is a strong compositional element. A strong diagonal, a building with roof lines that, creates good angles perhaps, and a good combination of light and dark. Somebody walking along the road in the distance, that creates a good focal point. And then see if there's potential for creative interpretation, but that you can work out back at the studio. Just look for those basics of a good composition. And don't forget, you can take a photo, for instance, of a large market scene, and then you can crop down into a very small element where it's just perhaps two people standing by a table. That could be a beautiful painting. You don't have to put in everything. It's more important what you leave out sometimes than what you put in. So work on your own understanding of composition as well. Know what are the basics of a strong composition, the rule of thirds, the dominant mass shape, and then the secondary shapes, and what are the values, light, dark, and middle value or two. That's usually enough. Diagonal lines, vertical lines, horizontal lines, balance one large shape balanced by a smaller shape. All these rules of composition, there are probably about 6 or 7 basic ones you need to know. And then try to enhance those value relationships, make the light and dark really pop against each other. And then use color to make that emphasis even stronger. A cool blue violet against a warm yellow light color. It could be grass, it could be a road. That's going to really stand out and look great. Also simplify the complex scenes. It could be perhaps a lot of buildings that look very complex. Just try to simplify them into blocks of rectangles, squares, and diagonal lines, horizontals, verticals, that sort of thing. You don't have to paint all the details. Simplify them into those basic block shapes and then focus on light and dark and warm and cool color. Do lots of sketches, plan them out. Get some preparation under the belt before you tackle the painting itself. It will make a world of difference. Okay, I think that is it. Quite a lot of information there. So if you are worried about starting out, just keep going. Just keep going forward. Keep painting. And remember, making mistakes is essential. I was told that in my first workshop I ever went to. The instructor said he wasn't interested in seeing perfect painting. And I was thinking, I was back at university or at school, I thought the teacher or the lecturer just wanted perfect results. And the instructor said that's exactly what he does not want. He can only help if he sees where the mistakes are, and you will learn from those mistakes and take that forward. And then you'll make more mistakes and learn from that. And over time, your painting grows and grows and grows, and you'll never be entirely satisfied because there is no end point when it comes to a creative art like painting. Right? You just keep going forward. You get more enjoyment out of it, but it's never going to be a day where you say, right, I know everything I need to know about painting. Okay, so don't sweat the mistakes now. You're going to make plenty in the future. And I have many, 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 many failed paintings stacked up in my garage. And I always say one day I'm going to paint over them, but they never seem to get out of the garage and back into the studio. But that's it. You've got to put in the time. Well, I hope that helped and has given you a few things to consider and maybe some of the issues that you've been concerned about. And if you want to join me each month and learn more about painting and learn from practical examples and then work on those paintings for yourself, consider joining my Artist Live channel. It's a subscription community of artists, and we get together once a month, spend some time with a lesson and recorded videos as well, and references and critiques and all of the things to keep you painting and engaged and inspired. You can't leave those elements out of your painting development, and it'll make a lot more fun out of your painting experience. So if you're a beginner, consider joining the Artist Live channel, or if you've been painting for a long time and you want to push things forward a little further, that'll also be a great option. All right, well, that's it for this podcast, and please share it with somebody who may be able to gain something from it as well. And I will see you in the next podcast or on my YouTube channel soon. Until then, happy painting and cheers for now.